hero lords and vital military, and the completer of the Egyptian domain in the Old World, taking his granddad, the establishing Lord Thutmose I, as a good example and ideal. Today denotes the commemoration of the death of Lord Thutmose III, who withdrew our reality on this day in the year 1425 BC. His dad was top dog Thutmose II, who passed on and left the male pharaoh and crown ruler Thutmose, alone under the guardianship of his auntie and stepmother, the renowned sovereign Hatshepsut, who was allured by the enchantment of force and tempted by the joy of administering, so she usurped power from the youthful lord and exiled him to the limitlessness of the shadow. The book, The Champion Pharaohs, Ambassadors and Military, by Dr. Hussein Abdelbasser says that Thutmose III stayed in the shadows for quite a while until sovereign Hatshepsut was missing or barred from the political scene in the nation, and the lion emerged from his cave to uncover to us the unbelievable character of Lord Thutmose III, recording Egypt's tactical brilliance written in letters of light and distinction in every one of the world's tactical schools and foundations. The book, The Hero Pharaohs, added that a few sovereigns of the realms of the Levant exploited Hatshepsut's rule and isolated from the Egyptian domain and framed unions with the strong Mitanni realm. In the second year of his free rule from Hatshepsut, around the 23rd year of their joint rule, the courageous Lord Thutmose III started his tactical missions in the nations of the Old Close to East. We are familiar this Lord's tactical missions through his chronicles, which were recorded by one of his commandants on the walls of Karnak. The records notice that the Lord was successful in each country he battled in. Thutmose III didn't wage his conflicts just to deify his name, yet in addition to praise the name of his preeminent god, the adored Amonisare, master of Thebes and ruler of the new realm, under whose standard he battled and carried the abundance of those nations to his sanctuary and clerics, who favored the loyal child of his dad, Amonisare, the extraordinary champion Lord Thutmose III. The tactical mission was a superb arrangement, unequivocally endlessly executed. We see him walking towards Gaza in 10 days, possessing the city and taking his direction to Megiddo, which opposed his standard under the administration of the ruler of Kadesh. There was an issue in picking the proper course for the powers to take to Megiddo. There were 2 regular courses, yet Thutmose III picked the unforeseen, restricted, most hazardous and rough course to amaze the foe and dispense with him. The extraordinary triumph was the partner of the fighter Pharaoh Thutmose III after he blockaded the city for quite a long time. He drove his military to battle in Syria each late spring for a considerable length of time, and he utilized the Egyptian naval force to ship Egyptian powers to the Mediterranean coast, and he involved Kadesh in the 42nd year of his rule, and in excess of 350 urban communities vowed devotion to the standard of Egypt in the Levant. And he completed around 17 military missions in Western Asia, and did crusades in Nubia and constructed various sanctuaries there, and contributed enormously to its Egyptianization. Present-day history starts explicitly with the year 1479 BC, and assuming we approach that period with the ideas within recent memory, we can call it the provincial frontier time. For 34 centuries, all political desire, whether for the individual or for human gatherings, was focused on geological extension and oppression of adjoining clans and people groups. At a time close to this time, quite possibly of the main fight in history occurred, and it might in fact be viewed as the principal fight whose news has contacted us in full, which mirrors the battle of abilities in the district of Old Egypt specifically, and its emergencies with adjoining Asian powers, particularly the Canaanites. Canaan was a verifiable district with a Semitic language in the Old Close to East, which today incorporates Palestine, Lebanon, and the western pieces of Jordan and Syria, and the word Canaanites became utilized as an ethnic term that incorporates different classifications of the native populace, for example the settled gatherings and the Bedouins. The Sinai area was the space isolating Egypt from those Canaanite lands, and the place that is known for Sinai was, despite everything, is the eastern door of Egypt, from which the Egyptian battling powers traveled north, and geologically upper east, and from which unfamiliar attacks generally came, as occurred with the Hyksos and different gatherings that attempted to attack Egypt and were subsequently crushed. The clash of Megiddo occurred during the rule of perhaps of the best Egyptian sovereign, the people of yore, Pharaoh Thutmose III, and it stayed from the beginning of time a defining moment, and surprisingly, the most thrilling talk is connected with the relationship of the site of Megiddo itself to future fights, particularly in the reasoning of gatherings with conservative strict propensities. What cut off that the skirmish of the apocalypse, between the powers of the north and the powers of the south, will happen here of the earth? Who is Thutmose III, during whose rule this fight occurred? What were the reasons that provoked him to face this noteworthy conflict? Also, for what reason do a few students of history think of it as the first slaughter recorded by people in quite a while of recorded history? Thutmose III in present-day Egypt. His name in hieroglyphics is Menkebrare, and he is viewed as the sixth pharaoh of the 18th line, and is viewed as throughout the entire existence of antiquated Egypt the organizer behind the cutting-edge domain. Thutmose was brought into the world in the locale of the realm of Dropkick, in southern Egypt, where the wellspring of incense and sacrosanct aroma is utilized in the customs of the old Egyptians, and it was heavily influenced by the Egyptians whose realm stretched out from the profundities of the African landmass toward the north of the Asian mainland. He was brought into the world in 1481 BC. And his passing in 1425 BC, implying that he didn't live as long as the last pharaohs, for example, Ramses II, who lived for around 97 years. The realm of Thutmose III went on until 1070 BC. Thutmose III was gone before in administering Egypt by sovereign Hatshepsut, signifying the most loved courtesan of Ammonius among the women or the mistress of Ammonius, the pearl of the princesses. She is quite possibly of the most conspicuous sovereign who governed Egypt, and the most compelling of them, as her standard was an unmistakable point not just in that frame of mind of the 18th line, yet throughout the entire existence of Old Egypt in general. At the point when Hatshepsut controlled Egypt, she followed a tranquil strategy with the areas of Egyptian impact in Palestine, Nubia, and with its neighbors, and she was keen on the naval force and sent armadas to the place that is known for dropkick and to the shoreline of Lebanon for exchange trade. Nonetheless, after her passing, a few protectorates in Syria and the prolific Baal, which were known as the place that is known for Mitanni, around then, quickly jumping all over the chance to acquire freedom. At the point when Thutmose III took the lofty position, he felt a condition of distance going through the veins of the leaders of the states subject to Egypt, and from here he showed extraordinary interest in what we call military methodology. Among the premier things that Thutmose III arranged and executed was that he solidified a dream for a normal Egyptian armed force, so he gave it knights and war chariots. During his rule, the antiquated Egyptians dominated the assembling of bolts, and he depended metal forgers with making lances from cleaned iron that isn't impacted by the environment, to the last thing that was expected from arrangements of the names of the enlisted people, and afterward conveying military positions among them. Thutmose III assembled palaces and forts, prepared fighters in the most ideal way, and gave them strong imaginative weapons. Since power is enticing, we find throughout the entire existence of Thutmose III around 16 military missions in Asia, through which he had the option to lay out his impact there, similarly as he laid out Egypt's impact as far south as Nubia. Nonetheless, these missions are one story, and the skirmish of Megiddo is another story. Megiddo in history and topography. Megiddo is known as Tel al-Mutasalim, in the plain of Mar Jibin Amr, a region among Galilee and the mountains of Nablus, and was referenced without precedent for the archives of Thutmose III, who vanquished the city in 1468 BC. Megiddo is viewed as one of the main Canaanite urban communities in northern Palestine, and is found 60 meters over the level of the encompassing plain. The city was attracted later stages, and its essential area, where aqueduct era prompts the plain of Mar Jibin Amr, gave it key command over the antiquated worldwide street, through Mars, which is one of the most established shipping lanes in the Center East and signifies the Street of the Ocean, in Latin. Unearthings at Tel el-Muslim have shown that Megiddo was a braced city in the early Bronze Age and Center Bronze Age, 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, and was critical, in spite of the fact that its most memorable notice traces all the way back to the 15th century BC in the text of Thutmose III. Was this the city and the site where the trick occurred and where a union of Canaanite urban communities emerged to oust Egyptian impact? Obviously, the ruler of the city of Kadesh in Syria proceeded to lead a partnership of sovereigns of the Asian nations in the Levant against Egypt, numbering 23 armed forces. Megiddo was not the main clash of Thutmose III, as it was gone before by different conflicts and fast military tasks in the language of our cutting-edge world, yet Megiddo would be something different. Megiddo was referenced in the main military text ever, known as the text of Thutmose III, recorded on the masts of the Karnak sanctuary in the Luxor region in southern Egypt. Megiddo was likewise referenced in the rundown of urban areas of Seti I, and in the Tel El Amarna letters in the Minya locale in Focal Egypt, and it has an old notice in the Torah, explicitly in the Book of Judges, where it is known as the city constrained by the clan of Manasseh as per the Hebrew scripture. How did the occasions of this thrilling and risky verifiable fight occur, and is there a solitary agreement about what occurred in it over the entire course of time? Kadesh and authentic antagonism toward Egypt. Before we straightforwardly examine the clash of Megiddo, we should call attention to the states of the Egyptians' relations with the adjoining realms, particularly the Kadesh area, for example inside the lines of present-day Syria. A few centuries before the hour of Thutmose III, the Egyptian armed forces attacked the grounds of Canaan, carrying with them their divine beings, as well as their severe burden, as Erich Dor Schmid, teacher of military history, says in his book Wars and Legends from the Skirmish of Megiddo to the Fall of Rome, and he proceeds with how ages of Syrians had to function in miserable subjugation under the whips of those he calls the brutal pharaohs. The ruler of Kadesh was sure that this would stop now. With great many tribesmen and many chariots prepared to battle, he would lash the youthful Pharaoh and send him whining back to Egypt. The ruler of Kadesh had impeded both potential courses into Canaan, hence removing the Egyptian armed force, and it appeared to be an optimal arrangement. In any case, the ruler of Kadesh was to find for himself later that in fighting there is no such thing as a well-conceived plan. The grounds outside Egypt controlled indispensable shipping lanes toward the east, to the extent that the rich bow and then some. Control of the streets implied control of quite a bit of Asia Minor. This predominance was kept up with the assistance of a strong Egyptian armed force. Thutmose I, pioneer behind the 18th tradition of the pharaohs, circa 1580 BC, made an expert armed force with distinct obligations. The infantrymen were outfitted with various safeguards and lances and were upheld by toxophilite. Nonetheless, the primary weapon of the Egyptian armed force was its adaptability of development, and the capacity of its conflict vehicles to assault, similarly as tanks presently infiltrate the core of the adversary's protections. 3,000 years before the appearance of Rama and Patan, an Egyptian pharaoh understood the worth of the hostile arrangement, and fostered his strategic powers on its premise. 3 hero lords, Ahmose, Amenhotep I, and Thutmose I, extended their realm to Syria and from that point to the Euphrates. A few students of history say that their missions were just Goliath strikes in which numerous regions were bulldozed, urban communities consumed, detainees butchered, and clans subjugated. At the point when these occasions occurred, around May 1479 BC, Pharaoh Thutmose III was sitting cheerfully on the privileged position of Egypt. He was a unique individual from birth. He had thinking at an early age, as well as otherworldly and military development, which dazzled the decision Pharaoh, his auntie, sovereign Hatshepsut, who delegated him leader of her armed forces. In spite of the fact that Hatshepsut ended up being an exceptionally effective head of a realm on the Nile, she remained militarily dormant in her peripheral regions, which energized open resistance in the areas vanquished by her ancestors. It was normal for Thutmose III to climb to the privileged position of Egypt after the passing of his auntie Hatshepsut, particularly after the ruler of Kadesh went excessively far in his resistance and approached the nearby city lords to raise a military, every one of whom were anxious to join his defiance. Without a doubt, Thutmose III's undertaking was difficult or basic. He needed to meet the incredibly horrible Canaanites, very much furnished with bronze swords, metal-tipped lances, and an enormous number of chariots at the city of Megiddo, which framed an essential intersection at the northern finish of the Carmel Mountains, situated on the shipping lane stretching out from Egypt to the Euphrates. While heading to the unequivocal fight, when Pharaoh Thutmose III, situated in the city of Thebes on the Nile waterway in southern Egypt, learned of the developing turmoil in the place that is known for Canaan, he responded rapidly and assembled a multitude of 20,000 warriors. This was the initial time in history that a development comprising totally of exceptionally prepared proficient units had been called upon. He personally partitioned his powers into 4 divisions of 5,000 standard men each, under the order of a division leader who could be recognized by his brilliant covering. The way into the pharaoh's solidarity was his portable striking power. The infantry was built up by the predominant weapon of its day, the chariot, drawn by 2 ponies and drove by a husband-to-be with a few bowmen as portable cannons. These quick-sending units were profoundly prepared and very much made do, and until the coming of the hero virtuoso of Thutmose III, chariots were just a method for transport that empowered aristocrats to enter fight in style. Thutmose was quick to understand the significance of the help given by these chariots, as their method for transport, supplies and extension manufacturers permitted him to cover the separation from Egypt to Gaza in just 10 days. After a brief reprieve, he moved to the city of Bayam, situated on the southern slant of Mount Carmel.